In 1974, a secret pact between Washington and Riyadh tied the world's most valuable commodity, oil, to the US dollar. This petrodollar deal quietly cemented American financial dominance for half a century. Fast forward to 2024. That 50-year arrangement just expired quietly and hardly anyone noticed. The US dollar's lock on global oil trade, a pillar of its power, is cracking. What happens when the petrodollar system dies? And how will this ripple through the world economy? It's a seismic shift, one unfolding quietly, with repercussions only beginning to be felt. To understand the petrodollar's rise and fall, we need to rewind to the early 1970s. In 1971, the US cut the dollar's gold tether, and by 1973, an OPEC oil embargo had sent energy prices soaring and the dollar reeling. Enter the 1974 US-Saudi deal. Saudi Arabia agreed to sell oil exclusively in US dollars and invest its oil profits in US bonds. In return, the US provided security guarantees and weapons. Soon the rest of OPEC followed. The petrodollar was born. Every country buying oil now needed dollars, and oil exporters earned dollars that they cycled back into American assets. This system made the dollar king. Global demand for USD surged as nations stockpiled dollars to buy oil. Oil-rich states plowed their earnings into US treasuries and real estate, funding US deficits and spending. America, in effect, could print money to import oil, and petro-states would send those dollars back to Wall Street. It was a sweet deal, an exorbitant privilege for the United States, as one French critic put it. By the 1980s and 90s, the petrodollar arrangement seemed unshakable, entrenching the dollar as the world's reserve currency and lubricant of global finance. No empire lasts forever. Pause. By the 2000s, cracks began to appear in the petrodollar's foundation. China was rising fast. By the 2000s, it became the world's biggest oil importer, even as the US was importing less, thanks to the shale boom. Saudi oil that once flowed west was increasingly flowing east. With China buying over 20% of Saudi's oil by the 2020s, the old arrangement, oil for US dollars and American protection, started to look outdated. Riyadh began looking east, seeing its future tied as much to Beijing as to Washington. Meanwhile, the US was unintentionally undermining its own system by weaponizing the dollar. Washington leaned heavily on financial sanctions, cutting countries like Iran, Russia, and Venezuela off from the dollar-based banking network. The warning was clear: rely only on dollars, and Washington can throttle your economy. In response, those nations sought workarounds. Russia started shifting trade into euros and yuan after 2014, and when harsh sanctions hit in 2022, Moscow demanded rubles or yuan for its energy exports. Iran and Venezuela have for years sold oil in whatever currency they can: euros, yuan, gold, even bartering oil for goods. Even US partners took note. The EU set up a euro-based trade channel with Iran, and India began buying some Russian oil in rupees. The biggest cracks have appeared in just the past few years. In 2018, China opened a yuan-priced oil futures market, the start of a petroyuan. Beijing also established swap lines to trade in local currencies. By 2023, China was openly urging Gulf oil exporters to accept yuan, and it wasn't just talk. That year, Saudi Arabia stunned observers by announcing it was open to oil deals in currencies other than the dollar. It was a jaw-dropping moment. The linchpin of the petrodollar system essentially said the dollar was no longer sacred. By 2023, roughly 20% of global oil was sold in non-dollar currencies. The petrodollar was no longer all-encompassing. The shift away from USD was quietly but decisively underway. All these trends converged in 2024, bringing the petrodollar to a quiet end. On June 9, 2024, the US-Saudi pact dating back to 1974 was allowed to expire without renewal. No announcement, no fanfare. It simply lapsed, marking the end of the original oil for dollars deal. Saudi Arabia now makes it clear it can sell oil in any currency it likes. They still mostly use dollars for now, but the point is no more strict dollar exclusivity. Around that same time, a flurry of moves underscored the change. In August 2023, India bought oil from the UAE in Indian rupees, the first time a major oil deal was done in rupees instead of dollars. And in November 2023, China and Saudi Arabia inked a 50 billion yuan currency swap, while also piloting a digital currency platform, mBridge, to facilitate direct yuan-real payments. In other words, they've started building the pipes for oil trade outside the dollar. By early 2024, many were declaring the petrodollar era effectively over. The dollar didn't vanish, and oil wasn't suddenly all in yuan. But the 50-year-old structure forcing oil trade through the dollar had been quietly dismantled. We've entered a new chapter. If the petrodollar's reign is ending, what takes its place? Instead of a single new king currency, we're likely headed for a more multipolar money world. Multiple alternatives are rising. China is pushing its yuan, a potential petroyuan, by buying oil from partners like Russia in yuan and nudging Middle East producers to do likewise. The expanded BRICS bloc is doing more trade in members-owned currencies, India paying for oil in rupees, Russia accepting yuan and rubles, etc., and even discussing a shared currency for trade down the road. At the same time, new digital currency networks could let countries transact directly. Imagine a digital yuan buying oil from a digital real. No dollars involved. Some nations are even resorting to old-fashioned barter and commodity swaps to avoid dollars altogether. None of these alone can replace the dollar, but together they're chipping away at its monopoly in oil. This moment echoes a familiar historical pattern. Dominant currencies rise and fall with the great powers. The dollar has ruled since World War II, about 80 years, which is typical for a top currency. Before the dollar, the British pound sterling was #1 for about a century, and it didn't lose that status overnight. The pound remained a major reserve currency for decades after the US had overtaken Britain's economy. As the saying goes, these things happen gradually, then suddenly. The petrodollar's dominance eroded gradually for years, and we may be nearing the suddenly moment when the old order is definitively replaced. Freed from the dollar leash, countries like Saudi Arabia can now pivot away from Washington. Geopolitically, we'll likely see a more multipolar world. US influence over the Middle East may wane as China and Russia step in. Notably, Beijing brokered a peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2023. And US sanctions will lose some bite if trade can happen outside the dollar. There will also be financial pressure on the United States. Foreign countries won't need as many dollars if oil isn't all priced in USD. In fact, the dollar's share of global central bank reserves has fallen to approximately 58%, the lowest in decades, as many nations stock up on euros, yuan, and gold instead. With less demand for dollars abroad, the dollar could weaken, and Washington will find it harder to finance deficits. America's easy free lunch, endless cheap borrowing and imports, is coming to an end. We're likely entering a new global financial system. Instead of one dominant reserve currency, there may be a few. Emerging economies might gain more autonomy, trading in their own currencies, but the system could become more complex and unstable. Without one anchor currency, it's harder for countries to coordinate, and we could see more volatility as this transition plays out. In the summer of 2024, the petrodollar era quietly ended. Pause. A 50-year-old pillar of American power, gone. The US dollar now faces a future where it must compete for its role, rather than rule unchallenged. For Americans, it's a wake-up call. The 50-year free ride of the dollar's supremacy is ending. For many others, it means more flexibility and independence, albeit with new uncertainties. The end of the petrodollar is not the end of the world, but it is the end of an era. It's the twilight of one empire and the dawn of something new. And often, the biggest changes in history don't announce themselves with thunder. They happen quietly. The petrodollar's death was a whisper, not a bang, but its echoes will be heard for decades to come.